Stay the course! We are dead!
Terminator Salvation, the fourth instalment in a franchise that just won't quit. Much like the indestructible cyborgs it features. Released in 2009, this film was supposed to jolt new life into a series that had long since started gathering dust. With a shift from time travel to a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and Christian Bale stepping into the role of John Connor, seemed poised to deliver something memorable. But as with many sequels that overestimate their own importance, this was less of a resurrection and more of a desperate cry for relevance. Terminator Salvation had a production journey that could best be described as a blueprint for how to turn a promising concept into a cinematic cautionary tale. Originally envisioned as the start of a new trilogy, the film underwent more rewrites than a high school term paper, handed in at the last minute. The studio, still reeling from the lukewarm reception of Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, decided the best course of action was to strip away everything that made the first two films iconic. Enter McG. Yes, that's what he goes by, and no, it doesn't get any less ridiculous with time. Whose previous directorial triumphs included Charlie's Angels? McG taking the reins of Terminator was like asking the director of Sharknado to handle Blade Runner. Spoiler alert, it goes exactly as you'd expect. And then, of course, there's the now legendary Christian Bale Meltdown. It wasn't just a professional dispute, it was more of an exorcism.
You got any fucking idea about, hey, it's fucking distracting having somebody walking up behind Bryce in the middle of the fucking scene? McG, you got fucking something to say to this prick?
I didn't see it happen.
Well, somebody should be fucking watching and keeping an eye on him.
Fair enough.
This is the second time that he doesn't give a fuck.
Bale unleashed his fury on a crew member who dared to walk into his line of sight during a scene. A scene that, let's be honest, wasn't exactly going to win any Oscars. The Meltdown was leaked online, quickly overshadowing the film itself, becoming the defining moment of Terminator Salvation's troubled production. Bale's apology afterwards was as sincere as a politician's campaign promise, but the damage was done. The incident perfectly encapsulated the chaotic and unfocused nature of the entire production, but at least he stayed in character when he did it. If the pre-production was a train wreck in slow motion, the actual production was like watching that train derail straight into a cliffside. Terminator Salvation was initially envisioned as a much darker, more ambitious film. The original ending had Marcus Wright, the human cyborg hybrid, killing John Connor and assuming his identity, skin grafts and all. The twist was supposed to pave the way for future sequels that would delve into the moral complexities of a machine leading the human resistance. Imagine The Matrix meets Black Mirror, but with less substance and more explosions. But then, because Hollywood can't resist shooting itself in the foot, the twist was leaked online. What could have been a jaw-dropping revelation turned into a spoiler so common it might as well have been printed on the movie tickets. Fans, understandably upset that John Connor was going to be reduced to a glorified meat suit, reacted as predictably as you'd expect. The studio, in a panic that would make even Michael Bay blush, demanded rewrites. The result? A watered-down ending where Marcus nobly sacrifices himself to save Connor, a twist so telegraphed that even Twilight fans could see it coming. As for the screenplay, it was less a singular vision and more like a script-writing relay race, with the baton being passed from one writer to the next, each sprinting in a different direction. Officially, the screenplay is credited to John Brancato and Michael Ferris, the dynamic duo responsible for Terminator 3. If you were hoping for a coherent narrative, well, bless your optimism. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The studio, perhaps sensing they were on a collision course with mediocrity, brought in a few other wordsmiths for some behind-the-scenes triage. Enter Paul Haggis, the man who made Crash, a film about intersecting lives, so it's only fitting he was tasked with untangling this narrative car wreck. Then you've got Jonathan Nolan, who brought the gravitas of The Dark Knight, attempting to sprinkle a bit of brooding genius over a script that was already suffering from multiple identity crises. And finally, Sean Ryan, fresh off the Shield, stepped in to add some edge. The result, a script that feels like it was cobbled together by a writer's room where no one was actually in the same room, and in this case, maybe even the same country. 1 minute, you're in a grim war movie. The next, it's like you've stumbled into a sci-fi soap opera, where the machines are more emotionally conflicted than the humans. If Skynet's plan was to confuse us into submission, well, mission accomplished? The hasty rewrites didn't just gut the ending, they resulted in a third act so disjointed it felt like scenes from several different movies. The narrative became a mess of set pieces, loosely connected by a plot that had long since given up trying to make sense. It's the kind of filmmaking that makes you wonder if they ran out of money for the storyboards and just decided to wing it. The special effects in Terminator Salvation were, in theory, a major selling point, with Industrial Light and Magic (ILM) at the helm for the digital effects, and Stan Winston's studio handling the practical effects. Expectations were understandably high. ILM is the studio that brought dinosaurs to life in Jurassic Park and made space battles iconic in Star Wars. Meanwhile, Stan Winston's studio is practically synonymous with the Terminator franchise, having created the original T-800 endoskeleton and set a high bar for practical effects in Hollywood. On the practical side, Stan Winston's studio delivered as expected. The physical models, animatronics, and makeup effects used for the Terminators were top-notch, adding a tangible sense of menace to the machines. The attention to detail in the design of the T-600s, bulkier, less refined versions of the iconic T-800, gave a glimpse into the evolution of Skynet's killing machines. These hulking, gritty robots were a nod to the industrial nightmare that Cameron originally envisioned, and their presence on screen felt authentically menacing. However, when it came to the CGI, the results were a lot less consistent. ILM, despite its pedigree, seemed to struggle with integrating the digital effects seamlessly into the film. The most notable example of this is the digital recreation of Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800. While the technology was impressive for its time, the execution left much to be desired. The digital Arnold, meant to be a nostalgic high point, instead became an uncanny valley misstep. The scene was intended to be a triumphant callback to the original films, but felt more like a reminder of how far technology had yet to go. While Terminator Salvation had the backing of some of the industry's top effects houses, the final product reflected the broader issues plaguing the film. The practical effects were solid, providing a gritty, tangible presence on screen, but the CGI, despite being cutting edge, often felt forced and inconsistent with the film's darker, more grounded aesthetic. It's a testament to the idea that no amount of technical wizardry can save a film that lacks a clear and cohesive vision. So what does it all sound like? Well, Danny Elfman's score for Terminator Salvation can be best described as a serviceable, if somewhat mismatched, addition to the franchise. Known for his whimsical, often quirky compositions in films like Batman and The Nightmare Before Christmas, Elfman seemed an odd choice for a franchise that demands a more relentless, metallic soundscape. The result? A soundtrack that never quite finds its footing in the bleak, post-apocalyptic world of Salvation. The iconic Terminator theme by Brad Fiedel, with its pounding mechanical rhythm, makes a few brief appearances. It's more of a ghostly reminder than a driving force. When it does surface, it lacks the punch that once made it synonymous. Elfman's original compositions, while competent, often feel out of sync with the film's tone. His attempts to inject emotion into the barren landscapes come off as disjointed, trying to add colour to a world that's meant to be devoid of it. One of the score's biggest issues is its lack of memorable themes. Unlike Fiedel's haunting motifs, Elfman's work here is forgettable, more filler than feature. There's no standout melody that lingers after the credits roll, no auditory anchor to draw audiences into the film's world. Instead, the music fades into the background, content to fill space rather than enhance the experience. The sound design, packed with roaring machines and explosive effects, tries to compensate for the score's shortcomings. It's loud. Very loud. But lacks the precision and purpose that made the soundscapes of earlier films so immersive. Rather than complementing the score, the sound effects seem to be in constant competition with it, creating a cacophony that overwhelms rather than engages. In the end, the score and sound design of Terminator Salvation mirror the film's overall struggle to find its identity. The plot of Terminator Salvation is like an IKEA desk you try to assemble without reading the instructions. Disjointed, confusing, and likely to collapse under scrutiny. Set in 2018, long after Judgment Day had turned Earth into a smouldering wasteland. The film attempts to shift focus from time travel to the grim reality of a world dominated by machines. John Connor, portrayed by Christian Bale with all the emotional range of a damp dish rag, is not yet the legendary leader of the human resistance. Instead, he's more like a post-apocalyptic DJ, spinning tunes of doom. and gloom over the radio waves, while everyone else is actually out there fighting.
We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone.
Enter Marcus Wright, played by Sam Worthington, a death row inmate who signs away his body to Cyberdyne Systems, only to wake up years later in a world gone to hell. Marcus is the closest thing the movie has to an interesting character, grappling with the question of whether he's man or machine. His journey from confused survivor to tragic hero could have been the emotional core of the film. Instead, it's overshadowed by relentless, often nonsensical action scenes that feel more like filler than substance. But the plot's biggest blunder? The decision to spoil the film's most important twist in the trailers. That's right. The reveal that Marcus Wright is actually a Terminator was plastered all over the marketing materials, robbing the movie of its one shot at delivering a genuine surprise. It's like if The Sixth Sense had a trailer that opened with Bruce Willis saying, "By the way, I'm dead the whole time." The lack of faith in the film's ability to engage audiences without spoon-feeding them every plot point in advance is staggering. By the time the twist is revealed in the film, the only surprise left is that anyone thought this was a good idea. The third act, which should have been a thrilling culmination of the film's themes, instead devolves into a series of increasingly absurd set pieces. The original ending, where Marcus would replace John Connor, was scrapped in favour of a more predictable showdown with the T-800, digitally rendered to look like a young Arnold Schwarzenegger. The climax feels like a desperate attempt to remind audiences of the original films, something they probably wish they were watching instead. Christian Bale as John Connor was supposed to be the casting coup that would elevate the film, but instead it's a masterclass in how to misuse talent. Bale's performance is so one-dimensional that you begin to wonder if he's actually auditioning for the role of a new Terminator. His John Connor is haunted by destiny, but with all the charisma of a particularly moody AI chatbot. The infamous onset Meltdown might be the most genuine display of emotion Bale delivered during the whole production. Sam Worthington, meanwhile, does his best to inject some life into Marcus Wright, a character who is literally caught between two worlds. Worthington's portrayal is conflicted and sympathetic, a refreshing contrast to Bale's monotone angst. However, despite Worthington's efforts, Marcus is ultimately reduced to a plot device.
Hey!
You will not kill me. He's on a transporter, heading for Skynet. Everybody deserves a second chance.
His character arc sacrificed to keep the spotlight on John Connor, who by this point might as well be an NPC in his own game. Anton Yelchin as Carl Reese is a bright spot in the cast.
The most important thing that we can do right now is stay alive. In here and in here. Just stay alive.
Managing to channel the essence of Michael Biehn's original portrayal, while adding its own youthful energy to the role. Yelchin's Reese is resourceful and brave, showing glimpses of the hero he will eventually become. It's a shame the film doesn't give him more to do, beyond being a pawn in John Connor's increasingly convoluted plans. Helena Bonham Carter as Dr. Serena Kogan and the voice of Skynet provides one of the film's few genuinely eerie moments. Her transformation from dying woman to the embodiment of Skynet's cold, calculated logic is meant to underscore the film's themes of mortality and identity, but like much of Terminator Salvation, it's underdeveloped and ultimately squandered. The supporting cast, including Bryce Dallas Howard as Kate Connor and Moon Bloodgood as Blair Williams, are given little more to do than stand around looking concerned. Bryce Dallas Howard's Kate Connor is so underwritten you might forget she's in the film altogether, despite being John Connor's pregnant wife. The writers must have figured that just by existing, her character would be enough to drive some semblance of emotional depth. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. She's reduced to the background, playing the ever-supportive spouse, quite literally standing around. Which, in a movie like this, is about as impactful as trying to fix a sinking ship with duct tape. Meanwhile, Moon Bloodgood's Blair Williams is one of the few characters who shows any warmth or humanity, developing a bond with Marcus. However, even this potentially interesting relationship is sidelined in favour of more explosions and an overabundance of CGI Arnold. The rest of the cast is a veritable who's who of wasted talents, with actors doing their best to navigate a script that gives them little to work with. What should have been a story about resistance and survival instead becomes a slog through character arcs that are as robotic as the antagonists themselves. Terminator Salvation makes a valiant attempt to tackle some heavy themes, but it ends up swinging and missing. The film tries to explore the blurred lines between humanity and technology, with Marcus Wright serving as the embodiment of this conflict. The idea that being human is about more than just flesh and blood, that it's defined by our choices, our morality, is a noble concept, but the film drops the ball by never fully committing to this exploration. Instead, it tosses these ideas around like a game of hot potato, afraid to hold on to them for too long lest the audience actually starts thinking. Then there's the age-old Terminator theme of fate versus free will. John Connor is supposed to be wrestling with the expectations placed on him by his mother and the future she predicted. Instead of diving into those implications, the film opts for heavy-handed dialogue and cliches. The idea that the future is not set, that we have the power to change it, is briefly mentioned, but never fully explored, leaving the audience with the impression that the filmmakers had grand ideas but no real plan. And let's not forget the theme of sacrifice, particularly in the final act, where Marcus offers his literal heart to save John Connor. This should have been a moment that resonated with emotional weight, a climax that encapsulated the film's deeper messages. Instead, it feels like a narrative convenience, a way to tie up loose ends with little regard for the thematic significance. Rather than leaving audiences with something to ponder, it leaves them wondering how such a potentially powerful moment ended up feeling so hollow. When Terminator Salvation was finally unleashed upon the world, it was met with the kind of reception usually reserved for a lukewarm cup of decaf coffee. Sure, it's there, but who really wants it? Critics were quick to point out the film's many flaws, from its incoherent plot to its underwhelming performances. Despite its star-studded cast and hefty budget, the film failed to capture the magic of its predecessors, leaving audiences with more questions than answers, and not in a good way. Speaking of budgets, Terminator Salvation boasted a reported production cost of around $200 million, making it one of the most expensive films of 2009. You'd think that kind of investment would guarantee a blockbuster, or at the very least a coherent narrative. Instead, it brought us a disjointed spectacle of ambitious ideas, unfulfilled promises, and enough CGI to power a small country. In terms of box office returns, Terminator Salvation managed to pull in about $371 million worldwide. At first glance, that might seem like a respectable figure until you factor in the marketing costs, reshoots, and the fact that every time Christian Bale scowled, a few more dollars were probably added to the budget. By Hollywood standards, this film was a modest financial success, but it wasn't exactly the runway hit the studio had hoped for. Those returns were more like a polite golf clap rather than thunderous applause of a franchise revival. Critically, the film fared about as well as a leaky boat in a storm. It was met with a collective shrug from audiences and critics alike, who were wondering if this was really the future of the Terminator franchise. The grand plans for a new trilogy were quietly swept under the rug, as the studio presumably hoped everyone would just forget this particular entry ever happened. Terminator Salvation ended up being more of a footnote in the franchise's history, a reminder that sometimes, even with all the money in the world, you can still miss the mark. In hindsight, the commercial performance of Terminator Salvation is a testament to the fact that throwing money at a project doesn't necessarily solve its fundamental problems. Interestingly, in the years since its release, Terminator Salvation has undergone something of a reappraisal. But let's not get carried away. This isn't a case of discovering hidden brilliance, but more of a realisation that compared to the sequels that followed, it wasn't quite as bad as everyone first thought. Context is everything, and in the context of the Terminator franchise's steady decline, Salvation starts to look almost competent. Almost. That said, this re-evaluation is more about faint praise than genuine appreciation. It's the kind of backhanded compliment you give a movie that was disappointing at the time, but now seems less offensive only because the bar has been lowered so much by subsequent entries. Yes, Salvation tried to take the franchise in a new direction, but it tripped over its own feet before it could get anywhere meaningful. The film's gritty, post-apocalyptic aesthetic has aged better than its narrative. That's like saying the wallpaper in a condemned building still looks nice. It's hardly a glowing endorsement. Outside the Terminator universe, Salvation has had little impact. It's occasionally referenced in discussions about troubled productions and the pitfalls of overzealous studios, but it hasn't left a lasting mark on the world of cinema. It's the kind of film people remember with a sigh and a shrug. Well, at least they tried something different. But in Hollywood, where success is measured by box office returns and cultural impact, different isn't always enough. Perhaps the most significant legacy of Terminator Salvation is the lesson it taught about the perils of leaks and fan expectations. The studio's panicked reaction to the online leak of the original ending is now a textbook example of how not to handle such situations. Rather than standing by their creative vision, they scrambled to appease a vocal minority, resulting in a compromised film that satisfied no one. In today's world, where leaks and spoilers are nearly impossible to contain, Salvation serves as a cautionary tale in the importance of confidence in creative decisions. And if you've enjoyed this dissection of a film that could have been, why not subscribe to my channel? After all, in a world filled with endless sequels, remakes, and reboots, you need someone to help you separate the wheat from the chaff, or in this case, the barely toasted bread from the completely burnt toast. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. Because let's face it, someone's got to keep Hollywood in check. So hit that subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's continue this journey together. Because in a world where every franchise seems to be on life support, it's good to know that we can still have a laugh at their expense. And remember, just because a film promises salvation doesn't mean it will deliver anything more than just another reason to reach for the remote.